The shadows of Whitechapel, Jack the Ripper. Imagine walking the fog-drenched streets of London in 1888. Gas lamps flickering, the chill of night sinking into your bones. And somewhere in the shadows, a figure moves silently, hunting, calculating, waiting. That figure would soon terrorize the world and become the name whispered in fear for over a century. Jack the Ripper. In this video, we're diving deep into the unsolved mysteries of Whitechapel, peeling back the layers of history to understand who this man might have been, why his crimes shook London to its core, and why, even today, the truth remains elusive. It all began in the East End, a place teeming with poverty, overcrowded streets, and desperation, where women eked out lives in squalid conditions, selling themselves to survive. Among them, Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly became the Ripper's victims. Their lives cut short in ways so brutal that even seasoned investigators were horrified. Newspapers at the time painted vivid, sensationalist pictures, fueling fear, gossip, and panic, while police struggled to find clues that could lead to the killer. No fingerprints, no DNA, no modern forensic science, just eyewitness accounts, letters allegedly from the killer, and a city paralyzed by terror. But what drove this man to commit such acts? Was he a doctor with knowledge of anatomy? A butcher familiar with knives and blood? Or someone whose rage and darkness were simply beyond understanding? The social conditions of Whitechapel only compounded the mystery. Poverty, alcoholism, and desperation created an environment where the vulnerable were easy targets, and the Ripper's cunning allowed him to disappear into the fog as if he were never there. Detectives relied on door-to-door questioning, crude sketches, and the occasional informant. Yet every lead seemed to crumble into nothing, leaving the city and the world grappling with fear. Letters sent to newspapers, some claiming to be the Ripper, offered taunts and cryptic clues, but many were hoaxes. Still, the mystery endured, fueling obsession and speculation. Over time, historians and criminologists have examined hundreds of suspects, from local doctors to members of the royal family. Yet the true identity of Jack the Ripper remains hidden, locked away in the fog of history. His crimes sparked the first modern press frenzy, reshaping how media, police, and the public interact in cases of terror. Even today, the Ripper fascinates writers, filmmakers, and amateur sleuths, reminding us that some darkness can never be fully illuminated. The problem is not just who he was, but why he struck with such precision and cruelty. Leaving the development of the investigation highlights the limits of human knowledge and the terrifying potential for evil to exist unnoticed in crowded streets. The climax of his reign came with Mary Jane Kelly, whose murder was so gruesome it marked the apparent end of the spree, yet the fear and fascination continued. In conclusion, Jack the Ripper is more than a series of murders. He is a mirror of society's vulnerabilities, the dangers lurking in forgotten alleys, and a historical puzzle that challenges logic and reason. If you want to uncover more dark mysteries hidden in history, stay tuned for the next story waiting just around the corner. The streets of fear inside Whitechapel's darkness. The fog hung heavier that night, curling through the narrow alleys of Whitechapel like a living thing, and the streets seemed to hold their breath as though they knew the horrors that walked among them. In this video, we're going deeper into the lives of the women who became Jack the Ripper's victims, exploring the conditions that made Whitechapel a breeding ground for crime, and why police struggled to stop the terror. Mary Ann Nichols, the first officially recognized victim, was found in the early hours. Her life brutally ended, shocking a community already on edge. Annie Chapman followed soon after, her body discovered in the doorway of a grimy courtyard. The horror of her murder, marking a chilling escalation in the Ripper's spree. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were killed on the same night, a night that would be known as the double event, terrifying the city like never before, leaving investigators desperate and the public paralyzed with fear. Mary Jane Kelly, the final canonical victim, was found in her own room, her murder so grotesque that even the most hardened police officers were haunted by it for life. But these crimes weren't just about individual victims. They reflected the social ills of Victorian London, the overcrowded slums, poverty, prostitution as survival, rampant alcoholism, and a justice system that often turned a blind eye. Police at the time were under immense pressure, relying on eyewitness testimonies that were contradictory, ambiguous, or non-existent. And while Scotland Yard tried every method at their disposal, from canvassing locals to posting officers on every corner, the killer always seemed one step ahead, blending into the shadows like he was part of the mist itself. Letters sent to newspapers added fuel to the fire, with some, like the infamous From Hell letter, hinting at a cruel intelligence behind the murders, taunting authorities and terrifying the public further. The problem was that fear itself became a tool, spreading faster than any investigation, influencing witness accounts and creating a hysteria that made rational inquiry nearly impossible. As the investigation developed, new theories emerged. Was the Ripper a local resident, familiar with the labyrinthine streets? Was he a skilled surgeon or butcher, evidenced by the precision of the mutilations? Or was he a disturbed individual acting purely on dark impulse? Each suspect brought a fresh wave of hope and despair to detectives and citizens alike, but no answer satisfied the mystery. The climax of this chapter is not just in the murders themselves, but in the psychological grip the Ripper held over the city, creating a climate where every shadow could hide a killer, and every passerby could be a witness or victim. In conclusion, the story of Whitechapel in 1888 is more than a tale of murder. It is a portrait of society's failures, of fear amplified by darkness, and of a man whose identity may never be known, yet whose legacy continues to fascinate. If you want to follow the trail of more unsolved historical crimes and uncover secrets hidden in the shadows of time. Stay tuned for the next chilling episode waiting just beyond the fog. Chasing shadows, suspects, and investigation. The streets of Whitechapel were alive with whispers, gas lamps casting flickering shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with every step, and the city itself felt hunted as Scotland Yard scrambled to catch a killer who moved like a phantom, unseen, yet leaving behind bodies that screamed of his presence. In this video, we delve into the web of suspects, the desperation of the police, and the mounting fear gripping the East End in 1888. Exploring how the hunt for Jack the Ripper became a test of human ingenuity, obsession, and the limits of law enforcement. From local tradesmen to doctors, from the overlooked homeless to men of higher social standing, nearly anyone could be the Ripper. And detectives had no shortage of leads, yet every path seemed to twist into darkness. Police officers conducted house-to-house inquiries, questioned suspicious characters, and analyzed letters sent to the press. But the killer's identity remained elusive, a frustrating shadow dancing just out of reach. Among the suspects were men like Montague John Druitt, a barrister who disappeared shortly after the final canonical murder, Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber whose mental instability made him a prime candidate, and Michael Ostrog, a conman and criminal with a violent past. Yet none of these men could be definitively linked to the crimes, leaving the city and historians alike wrestling with uncertainty. The problem, however, was not only identifying the Ripper, but understanding the motives behind such calculated brutality, as each murder displayed knowledge of anatomy and precision, suggesting intelligence paired with chilling disregard for human life. As the investigation developed, Scotland Yard faced mounting criticism from the press and public, with sensational newspapers reporting every rumor and hoax, further complicating efforts and creating a climate of panic and misinformation. The climax of this pursuit was the recognition that the killer had turned the city itself into a stage, orchestrating terror with precision, ensuring every shadow could hide him, every alleyway could witness his work, and every innocent passerby could become suspect or target. In conclusion, the Ripper investigation exemplifies the challenges of policing in a pre-forensic era, highlighting the intersection of fear, obsession, and the human need for answers that may never come. The streets of Whitechapel remain forever haunted by the unsolved mystery, a puzzle that continues to fascinate and frustrate even the most meticulous historians and criminologists. If you're ready to explore more chilling secrets of history's darkest crimes, stick around for the next episode that dives even deeper into the minds of killers and the shadows they leave behind. Letters from the shadows, media, panic, and obsession. The city of London seemed to pulse with fear. Every foggy street corner and dark alley carrying whispers of the killer's next move. And in the midst of this terror, letters began arriving. Some crude, some chillingly precise, claiming to be from Jack the Ripper himself. Each one taunting the police and captivating the public imagination. In this video, we explore the role of the media, the impact of these letters, and how hysteria swept through Whitechapel, creating a climate of paranoia, obsession, and fascination that still echoes over a century later. Newspapers printed every detail, no matter how grotesque or unverified, sensationalizing murders and feeding a public hungry for horror and mystery. While the letters, most famously the Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jackie postscript, and the From Hell letter, blurred the line between truth and performance, leaving detectives struggling to separate fact from fabrication. The problem was that fear itself became a weapon. The more the press reported, the more the city panicked. Witnesses became unreliable, and false leads multiplied, turning the investigation into a maze of rumors and dead ends. The development of this hysteria also reflected social tensions, poverty, overcrowding, and mistrust of authorities, created an environment where suspicion could thrive, and the Ripper, whether he wrote the letters or not, seemed to manipulate the city from the shadows, controlling perception as much as action. Some letters may have been hoaxes, sent by journalists seeking attention or pranksters exploiting fear. Yet others hinted at knowledge only the killer could possess, keeping detectives on edge and inspiring countless theories about his identity, motives, and psychology. The climax of this chapter is the realization that the terror extended beyond the murders themselves, embedding itself into the collective psyche of Londoners, changing how they walked the streets at night, how they interacted with neighbors, and how a city could be simultaneously fascinated and horrified by its own darkness. In conclusion, the Ripper's letters and the media frenzy demonstrate the power of information, misinformation, and fear in shaping history, turning the hunt for a killer into a story of human obsession, societal vulnerability, and the limits of control. If you want to uncover even more hidden truths and chilling stories from history's darkest corners, stay with us for the next episode, where we dive deeper into the victims' lives and the society that failed to protect them. Lives behind the shadows, remembering the victims. The fog of Whitechapel wasn't just hiding a killer. It was hiding lives filled with struggle, hope, and dreams that ended far too soon. And in this video, we step beyond the sensational headlines to remember the women whose names have been forever linked to Jack the Ripper, exploring who they were, how they lived, and what their stories reveal about Victorian London. Mary Ann Nichols, once a mother trying to make ends meet, moved from place to place seeking work, often facing hunger and hardship, and her life was brutally stolen one cold August night, setting the stage for the horror to follow. Annie Chapman, hardworking yet trapped in poverty, dreamed of stability. Yet her reality included living in overcrowded lodging houses and facing daily danger. A reality that ended in a doorway, where her life was cut short in a manner that shocked even the hardened police. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, killed on the same night in what became known as the double event, were women trying to survive, navigating a world where streets were unsafe and society offered little protection. Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest and final canonical victim, lived in squalor, yet carried dreams of a better life, decorating her small room with pictures and objects that reflected her personality. But even her personal space could not protect her from the brutality of the Ripper. The problem was that society itself made these women targets. Poverty, lack of opportunity, social stigma against women who worked as prostitutes, and minimal law enforcement, and predators could act with impunity. The development of their stories reveals a pattern. Women on the margins, invisible to the privileged, became the focus of a killer whose intelligence, cunning, and cruelty were magnified by the failures of society to protect them. The climax of this chapter is the stark realization that remembering these women is not only about recounting murder, but about acknowledging the humanity lost amidst fear, mist, and newspaper sensationalism, and understanding that history often hides the personal stories behind statistics and headlines. In conclusion, the Ripper's victims were not just names in a murder case. They were real women with hopes, struggles, and lives tragically cut short. And by exploring their stories, we see the intersection of human vulnerability, societal failure, and evil lurking in plain sight. If you want to continue uncovering where we investigate the forensic and investigative methods used to hunt the Ripper, and how modern science has tried to unravel his identity, hunting the Phantom, police profiling, and failures. The streets of Whitechapel were still shrouded in fog, and every creaking signpost or shadowed alley whispered danger, as Scotland Yard struggled against a killer who seemed to know the city better than they did, leaving behind a trail of bodies, but no clear clues. And in this video, we explore how the police tried to track Jack the Ripper, what they did right, where they failed, and how early profiling began to emerge in the hunt for the elusive murderer. Detectives relied on the tools of the era, questioning witnesses, canvassing neighborhoods, posting constables along likely paths, and creating rudimentary sketches. But the Ripper often struck in secluded areas, disappearing before anyone could intercept him. The problem was compounded by public panic and misinformation. Letters sent to newspapers, some hoaxes, some potentially real, misled investigators, while sensationalist reporting amplified fear and distracted from practical leads. Officers like Inspector Frederick Aberline meticulously examined the crime scenes, noting patterns, timing, and the condition of each body, trying to reconstruct the killer's movements. Yet each murder seemed to reveal new methods, making prediction almost impossible. The development of these investigations showed the limitations of 19th century policing. No DNA, no fingerprinting, limited lighting, and the difficulty of patrolling crowded, labyrinthine slums filled with desperate residents who were often reluctant or unable to cooperate fully. Early profiling efforts emerged from observing the precision of the mutilations, the selection of victims, and the timing of attacks, suggesting a man with anatomical knowledge, methodical tendencies, and possibly social awareness. Yet these profiles were far from certain, and the Ripper's adaptability continually outsmarted the officers. The climax of the police effort was a mix of hope and frustration. Arrests were made, suspects questioned, houses searched, yet the killer remained elusive, mocking the limits of human investigation. In conclusion, the Ripper case highlights not only the terrifying intelligence of the murderer, but also the challenges faced by law enforcement in a world without modern forensic science, showing how fear, society's blind spots, and investigative limitations combined to let one man operate in plain sight. If you want to explore more on how the Ripper's shadow influenced criminology and inspired future investigations, stay tuned for the next episode, where we uncover the tools, tactics, and breakthroughs that tried to bring him to justice. Whitechapel's shadows, society, poverty, and crime. The fog didn't just hide a killer. It hid a city teetering on the edge, with streets jammed with desperate people, alleys echoing with cries, and windows glowing dimly behind curtains that offered little protection. And in this video, we dive into the social conditions of Whitechapel, exploring how poverty, overcrowding, and social neglect created the perfect environment for Jack the Ripper to terrorize without interruption. Families crammed into tiny, damp rooms, barely able to afford food or rent, while women turned to prostitution not by choice, but by necessity, walking the cold, dark streets in search of survival. The problem was systemic. Police were limited, social services were almost non-existent, and the wealthy largely ignored the struggles of the East End, leaving vulnerable people exposed and society blind to their suffering. The development of these conditions meant that crime thrived. Pickpockets, thieves, and violent men prowled the same streets where women tried to earn a living, creating a world where fear was constant and trust scarce. The Ripper's ability to strike repeatedly was amplified by this environment. Narrow alleys, poor lighting, transient populations, and a city preoccupied with survival meant that a predator could blend in seamlessly, exploiting every weakness in society's fabric. A climax of this exploration is the understanding that Jack the Ripper's reign of terror was not only a product of individual evil, but of societal neglect, where poverty and marginalization provided cover for the darkest impulses to manifest unchecked. In conclusion, Whitechapel was a city crying for help, and the Ripper became a terrifying symbol of what can happen when society fails to protect its most vulnerable, reminding us that history's darkest crimes often reveal more about human systems and individual monsters. If you want to uncover how the Ripper's crimes shaped policing, media, and public consciousness for generations, stay tuned for the next episode, where we analyze the role of Victorian newspapers and sensationalism in spreading panic and obsession. Ink and fear, newspapers, sensationalism, and the Ripper legend. The city was alive with whispers, But it was the newspapers that roared, filling Londoners' homes with stories of blood, terror, and a killer who seemed to haunt every corner. And in this video, we explore how Victorian journalism turned the Ripper into a legend, amplifying fear, shaping public perception, and influencing the course of the investigation itself. Headlines screamed about the Whitechapel murders and the Fiend of London, mixing fact with rumor, speculation with hysteria, creating a climate where panic was as infectious as the fog that blanketed the streets. The problem was that sensationalism distorted reality. Witnesses became unreliable under the pressure of attention. Hoax letters were taken seriously, and the public's demand for shocking stories forced editors to publish every gruesome detail, feeding obsession and fear rather than helping solve the crimes. The development of this media frenzy also showed the power of the press in shaping society. People followed every murder, memorized details of mutilations, and debated suspects as if participating in the hunt themselves, while detectives had to contend with misinformation, fake leads, and mounting pressure from politicians and citizens. Some newspapers even published letters claiming to be from the Ripper, further blurring lines between truth and performance, fueling theories and inspiring copycats who wanted to mimic the killer for attention. A climax of this media storm was the realization that Jack the Ripper's notoriety was inseparable from the press. Without newspapers reporting every sensational detail, he might have remained just another criminal in the shadows. But through ink and fear, he became an icon of terror whose legend would outlive his victims. In conclusion, the newspapers of Victorian London didn't just report the Ripper. They helped create him in the public imagination, demonstrating how media, obsession, and sensationalism can turn a real tragedy into a historical phenomenon, and reminding us that stories of horror are often shaped as much by those who tell them as by those who commit them. If you want to uncover how public hysteria, hoaxes, and misdirection influenced the Ripper case and the course of criminal investigation forever, stay tuned for the next episode, where we reveal the hoaxes, false leads, and letters that confounded the police and kept the mystery alive. Lies in the letters, hoaxes, false leads, and the Ripper's shadows. The fog of Whitechapel wasn't just concealing a killer. It was hiding the tangled web of deception spun by hoaxes, false leads, and letters that claimed to be from Jack the Ripper. And in this video, we explore how these distractions both fascinated and frustrated the police, influencing public perception and making an already impossible investigation even more chaotic. From the infamous Dear Boss letter, signed Jack the Ripper, to the grotesque From Hell letter, dozens of communications arrived at newspapers and police offices, some written in crude handwriting, others carefully crafted, each claiming responsibility or taunting detectives. Yet most were likely sent by pranksters, journalists, or opportunists seeking attention in a city gripped by fear. The problem was that authorities had no way of verifying the authenticity of these letters. And with public hysteria demanding action, every note had to be investigated, drawing resources away from the streets and adding confusion to an already baffling case. The development of this flood of correspondence shows how misinformation can paralyze decision-making. Officers spent hours chasing false leads, questioning innocent people, and analyzing handwriting, all while the real killer remained free, moving silently through the alleys of Whitechapel. Some letters contained chilling details that only the killer could have known, blurring lines between genuine communication and elaborate hoax, making it nearly impossible to separate truth from fabrication. The climax of this chapter is the understanding that these hoaxes didn't just waste police time. They shaped the public imagination, inspiring fear, speculation, and countless theories about who the Ripper could be, while demonstrating the power of deception in the age of sensationalist media. In conclusion, the hoax letters and false leads were as much a part of the Ripper legend as the murders themselves, complicating the search for justice and showing how fear, curiosity, and deception can intertwine to create a historical mystery that continues to fascinate. If you want to uncover how modern science and forensic advances have tried to separate truth from hoax in the Ripper case, stay tuned for the next episode, where we dive into the evolution of investigative methods and the breakthroughs that tried to unmask him. In conclusion, the hoax letters and false leads were as much a part of the Ripper legend as the murders themselves, complicating the search for justice and showing how fear, curiosity, and deception can intertwine to create a historical mystery that continues to fascinate. If you want to uncover how modern science and forensic advances have tried to separate truth from hoax in the Ripper case, stay tuned for the next episode, where we dive into the evolution of investigative methods and the breakthroughs that tried to unmask him. Chasing the invisible, investigation, forensics, and modern clues. The streets of Whitechapel held secrets in every shadow. And while the Ripper vanished into the fog more than a century ago, his crimes sparked an evolution in investigative methods and forensic science that continues to fascinate detectives, historians, and true crime enthusiasts alike. And in this video, we explore how early investigative attempts, combined with modern forensic techniques, have tried and continue to unmask the world's most infamous serial killer. In 1888, police relied on rudimentary tools, witness interviews, crime scene sketches, and neighborhood canvassing, but with no fingerprints, DNA analysis, or sophisticated forensics. They were chasing a phantom, reacting to each murder rather than predicting or preventing it. The problem was that without reliable evidence, every suspect, every lead, and every clue had to be scrutinized with the eyes of intuition and deduction. Chasing the invisible, investigation, forensics, and modern clues. The streets of Whitechapel held secrets in every shadow, and while the Ripper vanished into the fog more than a century ago, his crimes sparked an evolution in investigative methods and forensic science that continues to fascinate detectives, historians, and true crime enthusiasts alike. And in this video, we explore how early investigative attempts, combined with modern forensic techniques, have tried and continue to unmask the world's most infamous serial killer. In 1888, police relied on rudimentary tools, witness interviews, crime scene sketches, and neighborhood canvassing. But with no fingerprints, DNA analysis, or sophisticated forensics, they were chasing a phantom, reacting to each murder rather than predicting or preventing it. The problem was that without reliable evidence, every suspect, every lead, and every clue had to be scrutinized with the eyes of intuition and deduction, often leaving detectives frustrated and communities terrified. The development of criminal investigation since then has brought remarkable advances: fingerprinting, blood analysis, criminal profiling, and now DNA sequencing, allowing modern researchers to revisit old evidence in hopes of closing the century-old mystery. Some scientists have analyzed preserved letters, police notes, and even artifacts thought to contain biological material, attempting to trace the Ripper's identity through modern techniques, while historians cross-reference records, suspect alibis, and timelines to piece together the puzzle. Yet the climax of these efforts reveals both the promise and the frustration of forensic science. While technology provides unprecedented tools, the passage of time, contamination, and missing evidence create a wall that may never be fully breached, leaving the Ripper's identity tantalizingly out of reach. In conclusion, the investigation into Jack the Ripper is a testament to human ingenuity, persistence, and the evolving power of science to confront darkness, showing that even the most elusive mysteries can inspire innovation, debate, and fascination across generations. If you want to follow the trail of modern crime-solving methods applied to historical mysteries, stay tuned for the next episode, where we explore some of the most compelling suspects and theories that continue to divide experts and thrill enthusiasts around the world. Faces in the fog, suspects and controversy. The fog of Whitechapel didn't just hide streets and shadows. It concealed the faces of countless men who might have been Jack the Ripper. And in this video, we dive into the most compelling suspects, exploring why each theory has fascinated experts and fueled endless debate. All while the true identity of the killer remains one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. Among the names most frequently discussed is Montague John Druitt, a barrister who vanished shortly after the final canonical murder, whose mental instability and sudden disappearance make him a prime suspect. Yet the evidence is circumstantial at best. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber, has been suggested because of his mental illness and proximity to the murders, though skepticism remains about the reliability of the claims linking him to the crimes. Michael Ostrog, a known con man and criminal with a violent past, was also considered, though timelines and alibis make his involvement questionable. Other theories extend to artists, doctors, and even members of higher society, including speculation around connections to the royal family, fueled by sensationalist media and imaginative theorists. The problem with these suspects is that no single one fits perfectly. Each theory has holes, contradictions, and missing evidence, leaving room for doubt, debate, and endless speculation. The development of Ripperology, the study of Jack the Ripper, shows how obsession, historical context, and interpretation of scarce evidence have turned the case into both an academic field and a cultural fascination, with amateur sleuths and professionals alike proposing profiles, timelines, and motives. The climax of this chapter is the realization that the killer may never be known. And yet, the stories we construct around these suspects reveal more about our desire for answers, the hunger for justice, and the human need to impose order on chaos. In conclusion, the Ripper's suspects and the controversies surrounding them highlight the intersection of fact, theory, and imagination, reminding us that some mysteries are defined not only by what happened, but by the questions they leave unanswered. If you want to explore even deeper into the Ripper's world, including psychological profiles and modern forensic attempts to narrow down suspects, Inside the Mind, Psychology and Motives of Jack the Ripper. The foggy alleys of Whitechapel were silent witnesses to terror. But behind the killings lay a mind both calculating and chaotic. And in this video, we explore the psychology and possible motives of Jack the Ripper, trying to understand not just who he was, but why he struck with such precision, cruelty, and consistency that his crimes have haunted history for over a century. Early investigators noted the anatomical skill evident in the mutilations, suggesting a man with knowledge of human anatomy, perhaps a doctor, butcher, or someone who had worked closely with bodies. Yet the emotional signature of his murders hinted at rage, obsession, and a desire for control, targeting women who represented vulnerability, powerlessness, or personal resentment. The problem is that profiling a killer in 1888 was in its infancy, with no established behavioral science, leaving detectives to rely on intuition, patterns, and the grotesque evidence left behind, all while the killer remained steps ahead. The development of modern criminal psychology allows us to theorize about possible motivations: deep-seated anger toward women, sexual pathology, psychopathy, or even a compulsion that merged ritual, pleasure, and power. Some experts argue that the selection of victims, marginalized women living in poverty, reflected both opportunity and a symbolic act, while the timing and location of the murders suggest careful planning rather than impulsive rage. The climax of this analysis is the realization that the Ripper's mind was a mix of intelligence, brutality, and secrecy, a combination that allowed him to evade capture while leaving an indelible mark on society, law enforcement, and criminology. In conclusion, examining the psychology and motives of Jack the Ripper reminds us that understanding crime is not only about identifying perpetrators, but also about exploring the darker corners of human nature, where obsession, power, and compulsion intersect, and that even a century later, the lessons of his mind continue to inform profiling, investigation, and the study of criminal behavior. If you want to delve even further into the forensic attempts and modern breakthroughs that seek to finally unmask the Ripper, a final horror, Mary Jane Kelly and the Ripper's climax. The streets of Whitechapel had seen terror before, but nothing prepared the city for the murder of Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest and most brutally killed of Jack the Ripper's victims. And in this video, we dive into the chilling details of her death, the impact it had on investigators, and how it forever changed the public perception of the Ripper and his reign of terror. Kelly, living in a small, dimly lit room in Miller's Court, was found on November 9th, 1888, her body mutilated in ways far exceeding previous murders. A scene so grotesque that even hardened detectives and journalists were horrified. Yet it also provided the most detailed clues about the killer's methods, psychology, and possible motives. The problem was the extremity of this murder. The level of mutilation indicated not just rage, but ritualistic intent, suggesting a man who had become increasingly confident, meticulous, and perhaps obsessed, knowing that police were hunting him, yet striking with impunity. The development of the investigation following Kelly's death intensified. Authorities were desperate to find the Ripper. Patrols increased, and every potential suspect was scrutinized more than ever. Yet the killer had vanished, leaving only a scene of horror and a city in panic. The climax of this chapter is the stark reality that Kelly's murder marked both an apex and an ending, the final canonical killing, but also cemented the Ripper's legend, demonstrating the darkness one individual could wield and how society, institutions, and the press could be both victim and witness to terror. In conclusion, the murder of Mary Jane Kelly encapsulates the horror, societal failure, and investigative challenges of the Ripper case, reminding us that history's darkest crimes often reach their peak in moments that shock, terrify, and haunt. Shadows over London, aftermath and public hysteria. The fog that had once hidden a killer now seemed to linger over an entire city, with Whitechapel and London gripped by fear, rumors, and fascination. And in this video, we explore the aftermath of Jack the Ripper's spree, how society reacted, and the lasting impact on public consciousness, law enforcement, and cultural memory. Following the final canonical murder, streets were patrolled more heavily, yet panic remained. Residents avoided the alleys at night, and the city was consumed by discussions of safety, morality, and justice. The problem was that fear had spread faster than law enforcement could manage. Hysteria influenced witness statements, encouraged copycats, and even seeped into newspapers, which published sensationalized accounts and exaggerated dangers, feeding a cycle of terror and fascination. The development of the aftermath also revealed deep social tensions. poverty, the plight of women in the East End, and the stark divide between rich and poor became central topics, as the murders highlighted societal neglect and vulnerability. Public inquiry and parliamentary pressure forced police to explain their actions, though criticism often outpaced understanding, leaving investigators frustrated and communities anxious. The climax of this period was the realization that the Ripper's terror had done more than kill. It had reshaped perception, altered behavior, and left an indelible mark on culture, inspiring stories, theories, and a morbid fascination that endures to this day. In conclusion, the aftermath of Jack the Ripper's reign of terror shows how a single, ruthless individual can expose the fragility of society, provoke fear, and influence history, while reminding us that human reaction to crime is as powerful as crime itself. From fear to folklore. The Ripper's cultural legacy. The streets of Whitechapel may have quieted, but the shadow of Jack the Ripper never truly lifted. And in this video, we explore how his crimes transcended time to become a cultural phenomenon, inspiring books, films, television, and a fascination with true crime that continues to captivate audiences worldwide. From Victorian penny dreadfuls to modern documentaries and novels, the Ripper story has been told, retold, and dramatized, blending fact and fiction in ways that both educate and entertain. The problem is that sensationalism often blurs reality. While these portrayals keep the memory alive, they sometimes distort victims' lives, focus excessively on the killer, and sensationalize violence for profit and attention. The development of his legacy shows a complex interplay between history and imagination. Scholars, writers, and filmmakers dissect details, speculate on motives, and create narratives, while audiences grapple with fear, fascination, and curiosity, ensuring that Jack the Ripper remains a touchstone for discussions about crime, psychology, and society. His influence extends to criminology as well, shaping modern profiling techniques, investigative approaches, and the study of serial killers, with experts examining patterns, motives, and societal factors that allowed him to operate undetected. The climax of this legacy is the realization that the Ripper's story is more than a tale of murder. It is a mirror reflecting human obsession with darkness, mystery, and the unknown, and a reminder of how history, culture, and media can immortalize even the most horrific events. In conclusion, Jack the Ripper's legacy endures because it speaks to universal fears, the allure of mystery, and society's ongoing attempt to understand human evil. Science in the shadows, modern forensics, and the Ripper mystery. More than a century after the murders, Jack the Ripper continues to haunt investigators and historians. But in this video, we explore how modern forensic science has attempted to pierce the fog of history, using DNA analysis, criminal profiling, and archival research to finally unmask one of the world's most infamous killers. In the 21st century, preserved letters, blood-stained artifacts, and police notes have been re-examined with cutting-edge technology, offering tantalizing but inconclusive clues about the Ripper's identity. The problem is that time has taken its toll. Contamination, degradation, and the scarcity of verifiable evidence make it nearly impossible to reach definitive answers, leaving investigators and enthusiasts with hypotheses rather than certainty. The development of forensic attempts, studies of preserved crime scene evidence, and the reanalysis of suspects' backgrounds. Yet each breakthrough seems to raise as many questions as it answers. Some scientists claim links to specific suspects, like Aaron Kosminski, while others remain skeptical, emphasizing the challenges of verifying evidence that has passed through more than a century of hands and mishandling. The climax of these scientific endeavors is the recognition that while technology offers hope, history's shadows are difficult to illuminate fully, and the Ripper's identity may remain elusive, a puzzle where the pieces are forever incomplete. In conclusion, modern forensics demonstrates both the power and limits of science in solving historical crimes, reminding us that some mysteries endure, not because they are unsolvable, but because they challenge our understanding of human behavior, evidence, and truth. From reality to legend, the Ripper in culture, the alleys of Whitechapel may have grown silent, but Jack the Ripper lives on in books, films, and television, a figure as much of imagination as reality. And in this video, we explore how history and myth collide to create a cultural icon whose shadow stretches far beyond Victorian London. From early penny dreadfuls and sensationalist newspaper tales to modern novels, documentaries, and Hollywood interpretations, the Ripper has been transformed from a man into a symbol of fear, obsession, and mystery, captivating audiences who are drawn to both horror and the challenge of unsolved crime. The problem is that this myth-making often distorts truth. Victims' stories are overshadowed, gruesome acts are sensationalized, and creative liberties blur fact and fiction, leaving the public with a thrilling but sometimes inaccurate version of events. The development of the Ripper in popular culture shows a dual fascination. On one hand, he inspires study, speculation, and historical inquiry. On the other, he embodies the darker aspects of human curiosity, where fear, intrigue, and storytelling intertwine. Movies, series, and novels portray the killer as everything from a shadowy genius to a monstrous fiend, each depiction reflecting societal anxieties, psychological theories, and the timeless allure of the unknown. The climax of this cultural impact is the realization that Jack the Ripper is no longer just a historical figure. He is a legend, a case study, and a mirror reflecting humanity's obsession with crime, mystery, and the extremes of human behavior. In conclusion, the Ripper's presence in literature and media ensures his story endures, reminding us that history can become myth, and myth can teach us as much about ourselves as it does about the past. Endless questions, conspiracies, and unsolved mysteries. The fog over Whitechapel lifted long ago, but the questions about Jack the Ripper have never disappeared. And in this video, we explore the unsolved debates, conspiracy theories, and enduring fascination that keep historians, detectives, and the public captivated more than a century later. From theories involving members of the royal family to claims about secret societies, doctors, or anonymous individuals, each speculation attempts to fill the void left by an identity that remains unknown. Yet few pieces of evidence are reliable enough to confirm any of these ideas. The problem is that the scarcity of verifiable evidence creates fertile ground for imagination, speculation, and myth-making, blurring the line between possibility and fantasy, and leaving each new theory both tantalizing and frustrating. The development of these debates reveals patterns: obsession with the unknown, desire for closure, and the human tendency to create narratives that satisfy curiosity and fear, while also reflecting societal anxieties and cultural values across generations. Some historians argue that conspiracy theories distract from real victims and social context, yet they persist because the mystery itself is more compelling than definitive answers. The climax of this discussion is the realization that Jack the Ripper endures in our collective imagination precisely because he cannot be pinned down. His anonymity allows every new generation to project fears, theories, and fascination onto his story. In conclusion, the unsolved nature of the Ripper case ensures it remains an enduring subject of inquiry and speculation, showing how history, psychology, and storytelling intertwine to preserve a legend, and reminding us that mysteries have power not because they are solved, but because they provoke thought, fear, and wonder. Shadows of the past, lessons for modern policing. The fog of Whitechapel may have lifted, but the legacy of Jack the Ripper continues to teach lessons about crime, investigation, and society itself. And in this video, we explore how the failures, successes, and mysteries of the Ripper case shaped modern policing, criminology, and public awareness. Investigators in 1888 faced immense challenges: limited forensic tools, uncooperative witnesses, public panic, and overwhelming societal inequalities, which meant that even dedicated detectives were often one step behind the killer. The problem is that these limitations highlight broader systemic issues: the vulnerability of marginalized communities, the consequences of sensationalist media, and the human cost of unprepared law enforcement. The development of these lessons over the decades led to significant changes: fingerprinting, DNA analysis, criminal profiling. Improved patrol methods and forensic standards all evolved partly because of the frustrations and failures witnessed in Whitechapel. Modern policing now emphasizes evidence preservation, community engagement, and psychological profiling. ensuring that patterns similar to those exploited by the Ripper are far less likely to go unnoticed. The climax of this reflection is the understanding that the Ripper case, while tragic, was a catalyst for innovation, forcing society and law enforcement to confront both the human capacity for evil and the systemic weaknesses that allow it to flourish. In conclusion, Jack the Ripper's story reminds us that crime is not just about individual actions. It is about societal context, investigative rigor, and learning from history, and that even the darkest chapters can guide progress in understanding, preventing, and solving crimes. The last fog, legacy, mystery, and reflection. The streets of Whitechapel are silent once more, but Jack the Ripper's shadow stretches across time. And in this video, we bring together everything we've explored: the murders, the victims, the investigation, the suspects, the social context, and the myths, to reflect on why this case continues to captivate minds around the world. The problem at the heart of the Ripper mystery is the unknown, a killer who vanished, leaving gaps in evidence, unanswered questions, and a society forced to confront both terror and systemic failure. The development of the story across decades shows the interplay of human fear, media influence, societal neglect, and the birth of modern criminology, revealing lessons that remain relevant today. The importance of forensic science, community awareness, and understanding the social conditions that allow crime to thrive. The climax is the chilling realization that the Ripper's anonymity has made him immortal, a symbol of the darkness that can exist both in a single individual and in society, while also inspiring innovations in crime solving, psychology, and historical research. In conclusion, the case of Jack the Ripper reminds us that mysteries shape culture, challenge law enforcement, and spark endless fascination, teaching us that even centuries later, history's unanswered questions can hold power, lessons, and intrigue. If you want to continue uncovering history's darkest mysteries and see how they connect to modern crime solving, watch the next video for more chilling stories and insights into unsolved cases that still puzzle the world today.